is Thomas Gregg. And most of you will recognize Tom because he was in the King's Chapel Choir for many, many, many years. These days, he now lives, and now it's actually full-time in Vermont in a very idyllic little log cabin, as you can see in the background. And so he has now become a virtual voice professor at the Boston Conservatory of Music, which, as some of you probably know, was subsumed into Berklee a few years ago. So we're going to talk about Here's Ray. Where's Ray? We're going to talk about how the sort of field of teaching voice has changed, because Tom has been at it for a little while, so he can talk about that. And then, so I was interested in discussing how it's changed throughout the time that Tom has been a teacher, and then more dramatically how it changed last semester, and then how that's different now that we're in the fall semester. At least this time you had a little chance to think about it over the summer and get set up and make it as good as you possibly can in this weird and wacky world. So let's, start by going back to the Stone Age, because I always think of teaching voice as a very primal kind of thing. You can picture the Neanderthals all singing with each other and teaching each other how to do it. And I think one of the reasons that we all respond so viscerally to people singing at us, is that it's such it's just a primary human means of expression, and everybody can do it to some extent. And that's why we all tend to have strong opinions. As soon as we hear somebody singing, we either love or hate it. And that can be, that's the singer's blessing and curse, right? That somebody loves your voice, that's wonderful. But if they hate it, what are you going to do about it? So take it away, Tom. Tell us about when you first got started as a teacher, and how you feel that the field of teaching voice has changed throughout your career.
Right. So it's nice to be here today. Thank you for all joining in. Just as a preliminary note, the field of voice teaching actually started around 1600, and we know some prominent voice teachers, particularly in Italy, that were starting to teach, particularly the castrato voice around 1600 or so. And Giulio Caccini was one of the first to have known to have been teaching his own wives and daughters. His first wife was a singer and she died, and then he taught his second wife as well and his daughters. So anyway, about 1600. For me, I've been teaching as a college teacher since 1988 when I joined the faculty at University of Mississippi. And I was there for 10 years, and then I left to go to Boston and started in there, and I've been at Boston Conservatory now for over 20 years, and started by teaching music theater there. I had been teaching music theater students at Ole Miss on the side, actually, and sort of had to learn how to teach them separately from the classical students. And so when I went to Boston Conservatory, it flipped, and I taught mostly music theater students. So that's a little bit of background. And I would say a couple years ago, I was thinking about this. A couple years ago, I said to one of my students, I think I should get in on this online thing, because when I retire, it'd be nice to teach some students just on the side, and it'd be nice to do it online a little bit. And she said, "Oh, that's a field that's coming up really fast, and you should get involved with it right now." But that was a couple years ago, and I didn't think anything about it. Well, in March, here comes this lovely pandemic, and they said, you have 3 days to get yourself out of your regular schedule and into your home and start teaching online. And I said, well, that's my sign to learn how to do it, because I have to. And so that was Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and by the following Wednesday, I was up and running teaching. I had to learn a whole new system. Fortunately, I'd had some students who had taken online lessons either in the summer or in high school even. They're that young. And they said, oh, here's how my former teacher did it, and here's how they do it in the summertime. And so I learned from them, and then I posted on Facebook. I want to do some trial Zoom lessons for free if anybody wants to take them. And I instantly had a whole bunch of people wanting to take an online lesson for free. But I met with two of my former students who are basically in the business of music theater, and they were gracious enough to let me experiment with it. And so all during the spring, I had to learn kind of a whole new system. Now, fortunately for me, I am not one of those teachers who likes to get up in front of the student all the time and do all kinds of physical stuff with them. Partly because I think that a student has to learn how to do things himself or herself. And so I want them to, or their self, for my non-binary students. So I was already kind of more of a verbal teacher than an hands-on teacher to begin with. And that's a big advantage for someone like me to be able to say something and get them to do something. The idea was I have this box here, and everything I do has to come from this box. So I'm learning how to use hand signals. I'm learning how to use my face. I'm learning how to say, "Is that what you really want to do?" And they're actually responding quite nicely. I find that the students who are self-learners to begin with do really well on the Zoom lessons. The ones who need that kind of hand-holding and week by week sort of getting in there and shaking them up, they are less successful on this online platform. And so I've actually had two students who left for the year at the Conservatory for a year, and hopefully they'll be back so that they can go back to their hand-holding. But there are all sorts of things that you just don't even know about when you start into this whole world. I would have students who had family members who walking past, or the dog, or the cat, or the or their Wi-Fi was terrible, or their parents were working at home online and their Wi-Fi was clogged up. And so there are all these factors that you have to take into account. Right away, one of my former students said, "Oh, get yourself a nice microphone." So I actually have a nice blue snowball microphone for myself to use. It's not kind of audio recording high quality, but for speaking, it just means that I have to not have to speak as much or as loudly. And I was working with different headphones. Everybody's different about headphones. I can't use earbuds because they just hurt my ears, and I don't know. So I bought these at the airport one time to wear on a plane, and they are super comfortable, and I can hear really well. And one of these days maybe I'll have to replace them, but they plug nicely into my computer. My computer is brand new. I was using a laptop that I upgraded a year ago, and in the upgrade it became extremely slow. So I used that laptop last spring and said, when summer comes, I'm gonna replace it. So now I have a beautiful new iMac desktop computer. I bought myself a nice chair, and I got a chair here. And I bought a nice little rolling cart because my house is tiny, and so I roll it back into the wall when I'm not on my non-teaching days, and I have a nice little cart set up. So I don't have any books behind me. If I were teaching somewhere else, I might have a lovely set of books. I love yours, Sylvia, but
mine.
Yeah, I love yours. But I sort of think somehow less is more, and so this is a sort of clean version of that. And but then you also have to think about We have 2 dogs and 2 cats, and I have to make sure that they're nice and quiet if possible. The puppy was barking the other day during a lesson, but yeah, but she quieted down. And then poor Johnny can't watch streaming television when I'm teaching because that would interfere too much with the Wi-Fi. In rural southern Vermont, we don't have the highest speed of internet, so we have to make do. So what did I do? I bought him a nice radio, and he listens to the radio, classical music on the radio while I'm teaching. Or he goes out outdoors and does his thing. So there's just so many factors that you have to think about when you switch it over to this online platform. But I'm enjoying it, and I'm enjoying hearing the students, and I think that there was some convincing to be made for students to keep at it in their degree programs, because they all sort of thought, what's the point if Broadway's shut down? And what I've been saying is, look, when Broadway opens back up and all those summer stock theaters open back up, you need to be ready, and you need to be ready by staying in the game and getting yourself into your training, and keep doing what you're doing, so that when the time comes, you will be right there ready. They're learning how to do things like make self-tape videos for themselves. Some of them have been doing that for a long time now, and some of them are so brand new at it. So if you have your speaker and your setup and you don't have it memorized, and they're figuring out how to do that. The hard part for a lot of them is they're in a little apartment in Boston, and so I get to see the greatest hits of bedrooms in Boston, which is kind of sad. So I make sure that they all have a nice clean wall behind them somewhere, so that they can make some recordings for themselves. Now, I will say, Heinrich didn't ask me to talk about this, but the hardest part of this whole thing was that I also teach a class for the classical students. I teach repertoire classes. And I thought that my fall class was going to be a hybrid class where I would do some online work and then go to school one day a week and hear them sing in person. When Berklee decided to go all remote, that meant I had to redesign that whole course. And believe it or not, I'm still in the process of redesigning it. So what's going to happen there is that my students are going to make recordings of themselves singing oratorio arias and posting them, and then we'll make comments on those recordings. Sadly, though, the number of recording tracks that they can sing with is limited and terrible, and a lot of the pieces that I want to hear them singing, they aren't available. So fortunately, we have an accompanist at school who has played for me many years, and she knows that repertoire, and she's going to make some recording tracks so that they can sing with the track and then post it for us. But I've had to put all my class materials into a thing called Google Classroom, which is another part of that wonderful world of Google. And we did that because the Boston Conservatory uses Google Classroom. So I'm learning had to take courses in how to post everything to that, and how to write quizzes and make grades. And so that's been another whole part of the world. When I got into this business of teaching, I was a high school kid teaching piano lessons, and then I taught voice in college, and never in my wildest dreams would I think I was going to ever be doing it virtually online at a little cabin in Vermont. So it's quite a journey, and it's going to continue to be a journey. We don't know. We don't know even next spring if we're going to be able to go back to school or not. I have a feeling that we might not, or we might do a partial year at school. We might do the hybrid model. All of our students are in smaller groups. They're called cohorts. And if we do go to a hybrid model, they will travel through their classes in a cohort. So a group of 6 or 8 students. will travel together. So I'm hoping that if that happens, I can teach my spring class, which is in British and American art song repertoire. Maybe I can teach some of that online and then hear them live. But honestly, I'm not really counting on it at this point.
Can you talk a little bit about sound quality? Because last week we tried playing a video over Zoom, and I think many of us have had that experience that listening to music online can just be fraught with, it's a little bit better on YouTube typically, but how have you sort of circumnavigated that with your students to get the best possible sound you can get?
Well, you have to remember that there are a whole bunch of components involved. So there's what sound do I have in my space? What sound do you have in your space? Meaning, do you have a microphone? Do I have a microphone? Do you use headphones or do you not use headphones? What's the sound coming out of your computer? Is it direct or is it through a microphone? So, how is your Wi-Fi versus my Wi-Fi? Are you using the upgraded settings on Zoom? Did you know, Heinrich, that there's the upgrade of Zoom has a new setting for listening to music on Zoom. And so if you want to, if you haven't upgraded Zoom recently, you should, because it's got that capability. So I have students that I know their sound quality is not going to be very good, because I've just been hearing them for a few weeks, and sometimes you have to say, is there anything you can do about that? Berklee gave out, because this online world, they gave out a scholarship to all the students to purchase equipment. And so I've been having some of my students buy a decent mic or a decent even a laptop or some component of that whole system that's not very good. But yeah, I mean, it's a real problem. The ones who have the best Wi-Fi and the best microphone, I can hear them clear as a bell. And so
I had the pleasure of attending your studio recital in the spring, which was also a virtual event. Can you talk a little bit about how that was put together and what the highlights were for you and sort of the takeaways from all of that?
Right. So normally every semester we have what's called a studio recital, and everyone in your voice studio at the Conservatory does a program, a performance, and that's of course live most of the time. So when we went off to our separate ways in March, we all said, are we going to have a studio recital or not? And my thought was to do a virtual recital that was a single video. So what happened was, and one of my students is good with iMovie, so what we did was each of my students submitted their videos either directly to him or they put them in the Google Drive folder that I set up for it, and he took them all. I determined the order of the program, I determined which songs work together and so on, and then he edited the entire movie. Actually, he did it in 2 parts. And we all sort of had a Zoom meeting and sat and watched that video. I think this semester we're going to do it a little differently because that seemed like one layer more than we really needed. So the plan is this fall for everyone to have their video ready, and then we'll go one by one through them, and I will say, and here is this student, and they will do their song and we'll all applaud. So some teachers did no recital. Some of them did a recital sort of like that. It was just so unstructured at that point that we all kind of did our own thing. We are going to have juries at the end of the semester, and I think the plan there, that's where you sing for a grade. And our plan there is to have people sing live, and we as a panel will do a Zoom meeting with them one by one. Sort of come in and out, and we will write comments and give them a grade. So we're figuring that out as well.
One of the things I found fascinating in watching was that you saw a vast difference in how people were approaching it, right? Some students were really very attuned to the new medium and doing fun things in the little box, kind of like what you were saying about your teaching spaces, right? And your
Mm-hmm.
and you saw some people really embracing the close-up, whereas others were just, I'm just going to stand up against a wall and sing like I would in real life, which is, that you have some opportunities, which I think all of us are finding in, even in our Zoom meetings, that it's a different thing than being there in person. And sometimes that can be some advantage to it. Speaking of which, we have a couple of questions. Amy asks, if I were your voice student, what rough proportion of the learning/benefit do you think I'd get online versus in person?
Well, I think that's such a great question. So one of the things I had to learn is how much technical stuff you do and how much repertoire you do and how you pace it out and how you sort of figure that out. One of the other things I did was I put a whole bunch of vocalizing exercises in small chunks in a Google folder so that I could have my students actually do their own warm-ups regularly, and I didn't have to be a part of that. And so what they typically do is they'll do some section of those audio tapes so I'll play and they sing, play and sing, and I can hear them doing those exercises week by week. So that's, I think, both an advantage for them and for me because we're sort of on the same page. But really, truly, learning to sing is... learning any task really is self-learning. So a lot of it has to be, you do the work, show it to me and I'll make comment. You do some more work, you show it to me and I'll make comment. I'm the facilitator rather than the one who gets you to making those sounds.
Very nice. Mary asks, any upsides from teaching online? One voice teacher I know mentioned it was easier to see how students are voicing their vowels. Any other upsides you can mention?
Well, I think the upsides are, as you mentioned, things like travel. I mean, I literally could teach anyone around the world. And a student could take a lesson with anyone around the world. There are some new apps coming out for people to study with people that they want to study with or take a lesson with, and sometimes really prominent teachers will make themselves available. We can do really amazing master classes with teachers, and they don't have to fly to Boston or wherever. They can do it from their home. We were talking about auditioning. You can audition from one tape. You can make multiple auditions happen, and so those are some of the advantages that I already know about, and I think we're still learning kind of what some of the other advantages are. In terms of just pure voice lessons, I don't. I sort of feel like some of it's still the same, and some of it's a little worse, and some of it's a little better. It just kind of depends on the student. One of the hard things I'm finding right now is I have a lot of new students, so I got assigned a bunch of freshmen, or now we call them first years because you can't call them freshmen. But I don't really know their personality, and I don't really know them as human beings as well. So with the seniors, doing it online was a snap because I know their personality, they know me, we know how we operate, we know how we work together, and so on. But with a new student, I think it's a little more of a challenge to kind of find that rapport. But it's happening slowly, even in the first couple weeks.
And finally, to take out your crystal ball, how do you think all of this is going to change the field going forward? Do you sort of foresee that maybe your next semester or, in years to come, that there'll be one day that you teach from Vermont always? Or do you think things are going to return to more of a normal case of state of affairs long term?
You can't really predict. But I do know, for example, that when I retire, I thought, well, maybe I'll only teach half a year, which isn't really that successful. Maybe only teach, because I'm planning on spending winters in Arizona. And now I'm thinking, well, if I have a good setup in both places, I could teach folks all year round and just shift over to my other location 2 times a year. And so that, to me, is a a real advantage. I think, so it levels the playing field. I've had a lot of students who didn't have any money, who were poor, who couldn't afford to do auditions around the country. And think about opera, it's the same thing. If you basically had to have a sponsor in the old days to fly you around to take auditions, now we don't have to do that. And I think that's, in some ways, a nice leveling of that playing field. So it's also cheaper. It's also cheaper and better for the environment and better for the world not to have to fly around and travel to all these places. So I think there are a lot of things that are going to stay absolutely the same as they are right now. But I do think that everybody that I know of just misses live performance as an audience member or as a participant so much that I think that's got to come back. I had one student who was on Broadway, and he and his entire cast got COVID in March, and it was kind of sad. And they're all just waiting to get back to Broadway, and the audiences are just waiting for it. So the live component, I don't think, is going to disappear. It's gonna in some ways get knocked down a little bit, but I think it's going to come back.
Yeah, well, hopefully we'll see some sort of combination, that the good and the bad, that there will be some positive takeaways from the situation we've all been forced into. Ray has a question?
Yes, Tom, this is sort of tangential. I wonder what your thinking is. I've seen this with some of my instrumental friends. Large orchestra works, grand scale pieces are just simply not going to be done for obvious reasons. In things like opera, music theater, you see a narrowing of the repertoire that will be doable, producible, and transmittable, because you can't do these grand Saigon or like that require so many people and so much logistic. Any thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, it's interesting. Both the opera and the music theater worlds have just made a whole lot of transitions into exactly what you're talking about. So Boston Conservatory, for example, is doing an online play with multiple people, but there'll be sort of individual sections, and they're starting to figure out what the smaller works are in the music theater world that can go virtual. And licensing of those shows has been transitioned over, so that if you want to do a virtual version of Oklahoma or one of those shows, they will grant you the rights to them now, which I think is great. Opera companies, there are 3 or 4 little opera companies in Boston even that are doing some amazing online work and virtual shows, and with smaller casts, but they're still involved.
Which brings up the union requirements. I remember when I was singing with Sarah Caldwell, if we wanted to do a production with a smaller chorus, they would say, no, it requires 28 singers. You can't do it with 16. And so they had a stranglehold there. Will they waive those kinds of rules?
That's all up for negotiation now. Remember that the licensing companies are making no money on shows unless they make concessions. And so it's in their interest to license works that they weren't licensing before.
Yes.
So I think the economics of it are in some ways dictating some of that. The interesting thing will be when there starts to be live performance again, how much flexibility they're still going to retain over that stuff. But I think that that window has sort of been shattered already, and that I think they're going to see some innovative licensing coming out and innovative performance.
Thank you so much. We are at time, and one of the aspects of the Brave New World is Tom has to teach at 12:30, so he has a few seconds left and he won't be late. Thank you so much, Tom. It's fascinating to hear about all this wonderful stuff you're doing. It's great having you, and we'll have you back to talk about how it's all going later in the year, maybe.
Okay.
Thank you all so much for being here.
Thank you. Nice to see you online.
Bye. Bye, everybody.
Hello, Barnett's.
Hi, Barnett's.